This is lesson 3 in the JavaEE web application development series. Today we're going to be walking through building a login screen for our application and validating a user when they attempt to log in. We'll be introducing quite a few different tools and technologies in this lesson, so I'm going to split up the video into two pieces. In this first part, we will be walking through the client side, setting up the screen and everything that we need to lay out the screen, and then sending the data to the server. And then in the next tutorial, we will walk through the database side and validating on that end. So we will jump in here. This is the auction site application that we have in Eclipse where we left it. And we're going to begin by going to the dev files that you have uh, included with the tutorial set. And we're going to be using a couple of external tools today. We're going to be using a package called crypto.js, which is actually going to hash our password, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And we're also going to be using a tool called Bootstrap. Bootstrap provides a lot of functionality for modern web applications, and the biggest piece of functionality that it's going to provide for us today is giving us a layout for our screen that will work on a desktop or laptop, on a tablet, or on a phone or mobile device. And we'll see that we can write our web page one time using Bootstrap, and it will automatically size and appropriately scale our screen elements for whatever platform we're running on. So to start with, so we've got if we go back to Eclipse, we've got our web app directory, and that's where all of our client-side code lives. What I want to do is we're going to start to split things out a little bit. And within web app, we're going to create two new folders. So you're going to right click on web app and select new folder. We're going to create a folder for CSS, and then on web app again, create a new folder for our JavaScript. We'll call that JS. So our HTML pages will live here directly under web app, and then we're going to start to reference JavaScript out of this JS directory and CSS, our style sheets, out of this directory here. We're actually going to take Bootstrap, provide some JavaScript functionalities, some special controls and things like that that we will be using later on. We're going to start with the CSS, and this is what's going to give us the layouts that we want for mobile and tablet and laptop. So eventually we're going to want to use this minified version of the CSS, but for now, if you go to the Bootstrap directory CSS, let's copy bootstrap.css, copy it, and paste it into our CSS directory. So this gives us the Bootstrap style sheets that we need. The other piece that we're going to need is from crypto.js. So we go to the crypto.js directory and then to rollups. Crypto.js provides a variety of different encryption and hashing tools. The one that we're going to use in our application today is SHA-256.js. We're going to find that JavaScript file and again copy it and paste it into the JS directory of our application. So this is going to provide us some of our encryption hashing algorithms that we will need. So those are some of the external tools. In the documentation, you can see where to download Bootstrap and crypto.js if you need to get them. Otherwise, they're included with the package that we sent over with these tutorials. We'll go back to now to our dev files and lesson 3. And we've got a whole bunch of new files we're going to be working with here. Let's start with our login.html. We're going to create a new page in our website that will allow a user to log into the website. So we're going to take this page and copy it and paste it into our web app directory. So let's take a look at what's going on in login.html. So this is standard HTML. We set the title here to say auction site login, so that's what will show up at the top in in the tab of the browser, and we're going to start to reference some of these external files that we've been using. We are linking to the bootstrap.css file. That's what we copied in just a minute ago. This is the Bootstrap functionality, the style sheets for Bootstrap. I'm also referencing a new style sheet. We're going to start a new style sheet for this website. This will contain all the styles that are specific to this particular web application. That's auctionsite.css. We'll copy that in a second. We are referencing jQuery again because we're using that. We're going to embed a script for our hashing algorithm. That's the one that we copied from crypto.js, SHA256.js. And then we're going to reference functionality for the login page in login.js. So what we want to talk about here is the MVC architecture. With this architecture we want to use, it's a model view controller architecture. And so what we're starting to do here is all of our functionality is going to be in this login.js file. In the HTML file, we just want to um, put in our view information. We just want to display the basic form. So we're trying to separate the view, what the user sees, from the controller, all of the actions and functionality and logic that we're doing on the login screen. So let's walk through the view, and then we'll go ahead and copy in this CSS and JavaScript in a bit. We're using Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is based on the concept of a container. So within a container, that's going to give you a fixed width um, block that will render on in your web browser. Within a container, you can create multiple rows, and these are just blocks of content that fill the width of the container. Bootstrap is based on the idea of dividing your screen into 12 columns. So you can think of it within that container, there are 12 columns. And this helps us to lay things out. If you have data that you want to display kind of two lists, one on the left side and one on the right side, you can set up a div that will contain the left 6 columns and then set up another div that will contain the right 6 columns. And Bootstrap allows you to do that. And the nice thing is that if you render it on your laptop, those columns will be fairly wide. If you render it on your phone, those columns will be narrow, but the form will lay out, the container will lay out the same way regardless of the platform. So we've got our Bootstrap container here. When I'm referencing class equals container, container is defined in the bootstrap.css. And then I'm setting up a div with a class of row. This is a new row in Bootstrap. This style element is also defined in bootstrap.css. So here's where we're going to do the bulk of our work for our login screen. We're going to create another div. Our class is going to be column MD6. So basically we're saying that the elements that we're going to be displaying are going to use are going to be 6 of these bootstrap columns wide. So it's going to take up about half of the width of the screen. So we're going to use 6 of our 12 columns. And I want to center this. So I'm adding another style element here to say column MD offset 3. So what's going to happen here is we have our 12 bootstrap columns. It's going to offset, it's going to basically, we'll have 3 blank columns on the left. Then our login screen will fill the middle 6. And then there are 3 left over that will be off on the right. So our login screen will be centered in the middle of the screen and take up about half the width of the screen. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll walk through that a little bit more once we get this up and running. Inside of this div, we're going to create a form. And the form has an ID of login form, and the class is form. This is yet another Bootstrap CSS element. And within that form, we're going to set up a couple of form groups. And a form group just basically groups a label with an input element. So in this first form group, we've got, we say email address. It's going to display that text email address, and then an input for the user to type in their email address of type email. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the name of this field in the form is email. Then we have another form group, label as password, and an input here of type password. When we say type password, our browser will automatically render those little dots. As you type in keys, you won't see what you're typing. It will obscure that and put in little dots. So it's just a nice, quick way the browser can handle password inputs for us. And the ID of this particular field is text password. You'll see here I'm also including another hidden field that is our hashed password. And so what we're going to do, the user is going to type in a password. We're going to hash it, encrypt it, and then store it in this field. And then within the form, we also have a button to submit the form. The text for that button, the button will be labeled login. And these are all, again, Bootstrap style for us. So Bootstrap gives us all these things. You can create big buttons, buttons of different colors, all kinds of different things, just by specifying the appropriate Bootstrap classes. If you want more information on Bootstrap, you can go to, I've got it noted here, getbootstrap.com. There's all kinds of tutorials, and we'll show you some of the different possibilities with Bootstrap. And then after the form, we're putting in another little div with an ID of login result. And this is where we'll be able to display a message to the user, like either your login was successful or incorrect password or whatever. So here's the basic JavaScript form. Let's go ahead and get the other files that we're going to need. You can see we referenced auctionsite.css, and this is we're going to start to begin to build the CSS for our site. So let's copy auctionsite.css, and we're going to drop that into the CSS directory. There's not a whole lot here, but let's look at what we've got. So Bootstrap will take care of centering things on the screen horizontally. We've got that 12-column layout. We're going to use the 6 columns in the middle for something. We also want to center our screen vertically. We want this login form to be in the middle of the screen. We're going to use flexible containers. It's another way to style in CSS to align our form vertically on the screen. So here I'm just creating a new style element called vert center, basically saying that we want to use the full height of the screen. And then we've got this display flex. This gives you what's called a flexible container. And then within that container, align, center our items within that container vertically. So if you go back to login.html, you can see around our Bootstrap container, I have another container where I'm specifying this vert center class. So basically, this is just giving us a vertical centering, and then Bootstrap will take care of the horizontal centering for us. Let's go look now at the JavaScript for our login screen. And you can take that file and copy it, and let's paste it into our JS directory. And let's take a look at what we have in here. So this is, you can see in our HTML code, we've already included jQuery, and we've got our encryption function, and now we're including the login.js function. So basically, when the browser renders this, this login.js is essentially going to get bundled right into our HTML page in here. So as we saw in the previous tutorials, when our page is rendered, jQuery will execute the document.ready function. So in our document.ready function, we're going to do two things. The first thing has to do with hashing our password. So basically, when the user types in a password, we don't want to send that password over the internet or store it in the database just as plain text. We don't want to mess with having somebody's password or storing it or transmitting it or anything like that. So what we're going to do is hash a password. So you'll hear sometimes about encryption or about hashing. They're kind of two different technologies. Encryption functions as a two-way mechanism. When you encrypt something, you're using an algorithm that takes what the user typed in. For example, if our password is just password, you can encrypt it and send it over the wire, and then you can decrypt it to get back to what the user originally typed in. It's kind of a two-way thing. You can encrypt it and then get the original, what the user typed in, back. With hashing, it's a one-way algorithm. We're going to type in something. The user types in password. We're going to hash it. It's going to give us a big, long kind of jumble of characters. We can't get the original text back from a hash. But that's okay. We're actually going to store the hash in the database, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the server side of this algorithm. But basically, we just don't want to hang on to the user's actual password. So we're going to use a jQuery function and say, on the login form, when on is used to detect an event, on a change event of this field, a field with an ID text password. So when in this field, oops, sorry, it's this one down here. In this field, when this input field changes, it has an ID of text password. When that changes, run this function. We're going to get the value that's in that input field, and that's what the user typed in. So if they type in PASSWRD, password, plain text will be set to password. We're going to pass that into our Crypto.js hashing algorithm, and we're going to get back our hashed password. And then we're going to store that in this other hidden field, input field. So this one will actually hold the hashed password. So that's what this little function does. And then the second function is deals with when we hit the submit button. So you'll see here we've got our button, and it's of type submit. So when you click on this button, it will fire a submit event, and jQuery is going to manage that here. When the submit button is hit, run this function. The actual event data is going to be passed into this function. Now, a browser by default or a form by default does a whole bunch of work for us. We basically want to stop that default work. We don't want the form to do whatever the browser naturally does with forms. We want to handle it ourselves. So this is a really valuable little bit of code that you'll use quite frequently. If we're trapping an event, the event is passed in this variable e, we can say e.preventDefault, basically telling the browser, stop, don't do anything with this event, we're going to handle it. So we do this prevent default, and now we're going to make an AJAX call, another AJAX call. We're going to call auction site web API. Remember, this is the special URL that we set up for all of our REST calls, and we're going to call a function called login. It's of type post. It doesn't have to be, it could be a get or a post. And now the data that we're going to pass in, so we're going to call this function, we're going to pass in some data. We're going to call a special function called serialize. And basically this is going to wrap up all of the form data and bundle it with our AJAX request. And if the function succeeds, it will call this login success method, and if it fails, it will call this login fail method. And those are just simple little functions that will put some data in this little div that we set up, basically saying you're either logged in or we can't log you in. Let's look a little bit more at the serialize function. On a form, you can see that these input fields have names. So it's only going to serialize the input fields on the form that have a name. And when we call that serialized function, it's basically going to say, it's going to wrap up some data into JSON format and say email, and then give it the data for that field will be whatever we typed into the email address. And again, for the password field, which is our hashed password, it will then pass in that data. So this is the basic login screen on the client side. Let's go ahead and start our site and see what we've got. So again, all we have to do is our server here is stopped. If we go to auction site and we say run as, and then run on server, it will go ahead and start. Because I'd already deployed it there, I could just go ahead and right click down here in in this server tab. I'm gonna let it start up here. And you can see it come. This is that index page that we had created originally. I'm gonna go ahead and close this. So if I want to start and stop it, I can also do it right here and just right click stop or start or restart. I'm gonna go back to my browser now. So we're running on localhost port 8080 auction site. By default, it's gonna load index.html. We don't want to do that. Now we want to load login.html. And here's the login page that we created. As you can see, Bootstrap makes things look pretty for us. Here's what I was talking about. We have this screen is divided into 12 columns. So there's 3 columns over here on the left, and then our actual login form takes 6 columns, and then there's 3 columns on the right. We did this flexible container layout, vertically center it here on the screen. So if we type in an email address, I'm going to say admin@mail.com, and then password of password. And you can see because we set this up as the input the type is password, it kind of hides it for us. We can click on the login button. Obviously, we have not implemented, when we click on the submit button, we're making this AJAX call. We have not implemented this function, so we're going to get the login fail right away. But you can see that it's processing the form. Let me show you a couple of things. Over here in the email address, if I just type in Steve and try and hit login, it's looking for an email address. If you remember, if you look over here in the login.html, we said that this input is of type email. So the browser actually does some validation for us, which is nice, making sure that we're typing in a valid email address. And then, so I'm going to go back. We'll type in admin@mail.com. Password is PASSWORD. Now, I'm going to open up our browser tools. You can hit F12 or more tools, developer tools. And we've got information here. This is from the last run through. Basically, it's trying to call Web API login and saying that it can't find that resource, which makes sense. We haven't implemented it. Here's our sources. What I want to do, I want to look at this network tab. So I'm going to click on log. So I've typed in admin@mail.com. I've put in the password of password. I'm going to click the login button. So you can see it's making a call to Web API login. If you click on this, we can see what's actually happening here. I'm going to pull this up so we can see a little bit more. It's sending a request, and here's our request information. Remember, we passed data. We serialized the form, and so we had a field with a name of email, and this is what we typed in that email field, admin@mail.com, and then we have a field with a name password. This is the password hash right here, and I'm actually gonna, if you can copy that data, we're gonna save it because we're gonna need it in part 2 here. But this is the hashed passwords. You can see it's there's no way you'd be able to figure out what the user originally typed in, but this is what is going to the server. So that is the basic implementation of the client side of our login screen. In the next session, we will set up the database and we'll take the data that comes from the client side and validate the login and either uh, log them in successfully or let them know that they entered an invalid username or password. And we will do that in the next session.